Meltdown. Authorities continue the crackdown, but the trend continues to rise. We'll take a look at the issue. Plus, a local hometown business that helps highlight your art. They continue to thrive on Charleston's west side, and we'll talk to coal leaders and see
the rest of the weekend and the return of more Arctic air in just a few minutes.
Thank you, Spencer. We look forward to hearing what you have to say. Now, meth has long been a topic of discussion here in the Mountain State. The state legislature made changes in laws by putting certain medications behind the counter and requiring ID to purchase them. Sandra Cole joins us now with more on this problem. Sandra?
Scott, there is a new twist in the drug war here in West Virginia. Investigators are seeing a resurgence in meth labs, like the lab deputies say they found in Kanawha County just last night. But that's not the twist. The twist is that more and more innocent people are being drawn in and hurt by meth simply by living too close.
We've seen here recently that there's been a lot, like you just said, that affects not only the person in the apartment or the house, but those that surround them, you know, that didn't do anything wrong, that get affected by meth.
Tonight we'll hear from a woman who lost everything to meth, not because she's involved in the drug trade, she's not. A tenant in her apartment building was running a meth lab, and everything she owned turned to toxic waste. Also at 11, we'll have exclusive new details on the recent rise in cases like this one, and a new solution in the works for people who did nothing wrong but lost everything to meth. You'll see those stories only on 13 News tonight at 11. Scott?
Thanks, Sandra, for that report. That stuff is interesting. Look forward to that. Now, after hearing what Sandra discovered, what do you think is the most effective way to combat the meth problem? That's what we're asking in today's web poll. To vote, just log on to our website, WOWKTV.com. We'll have results tonight on 13 News at 11. Moving on, a man charged with operating a meth lab and child neglect was back in court today. Mark Cobb of St. Albans was arrested after an anonymous tip led deputies to their home last year. Investigators found an active meth lab in the basement and his 20-month-old daughter inside the home. He already pleaded guilty to the meth charges. Cobb was in court today for violating his probation from a previous drug charge. Meanwhile, a St. Albans man is facing felony sexual assault charges. According to Clay County
Arctic air for next week. The latest on 13 News at 6.
Deadly meth labs. Are they making a comeback in the Mountain State? A special report you don't want to miss. Mountain State Meth, tonight on 13 News at 11.
This week only at Ashley Furniture.
Scheduled to begin in March. Now to the latest on Mountain State Meth. Former Glasgow police officer Christopher Neely faces charges of manufacturing meth after officers found a duffel bag with meth-making materials at his mobile home. Troopers will charge him with attempting to operate a meth lab and having pseudoephedrine out of its original state. Police say his residence will have to be condemned. The unfortunate fact is that you've heard stories like that before, but here's something you may not have heard. Investigators are seeing a strange new trend as more and more people are being affected by meth who have nothing to do with the drug themselves. They're neighbors in apartment buildings or homes that are close together. When a meth lab gets busted, it turns the entire area into the equivalent of a toxic waste dump, and innocent people who live too close can lose everything.
We've seen here recently that there's been a lot, like you just said, that affects not only the person in the apartment or the house, but those that surround them, you know, that didn't do anything wrong, that get affected by meth.
And tonight at 11, in the first part of our series, Mountain State Meth, you will meet a woman who's lived that nightmare. She came home one day to find police officers swarming her apartment building. They were busting a meth lab across the hall from where she lived and taking everything she owned because it was contaminated by the toxic fumes from the chemicals used to make the drug.
Everyday items, I mean, you can't explain it. I mean, it's like you've been wiped out like a fire or a flood.
It is a compelling story about a woman who did nothing wrong but whose life was turned upside down by meth. Also at 11, exclusive new details on the recent rise in cases just like this, and a new solution in the works for the innocent victims of meth. You'll see those stories only on 13 News tonight at 11. Well, meth is also the subject of today's 13 News web poll. We want to know, what do you think is the most effective way to combat the meth problem? To take part, just go to WOWKTV.com and we'll have the results tonight on 13 News at 11. And still to come on 13 News at 6. Been a topic of discussion in the Mountain State. The legislature made changes in the laws by putting certain medications behind the counter and requiring IDs to purchase them. But there's a new twist in the drug war in West Virginia. Investigators are seeing a resurgence in meth labs, like the lab deputies say they found in Kanawha County just last night. But that's not the twist. The twist is that more and more innocent people are being drawn in and hurt by meth simply by living next door. And tonight at 11, in the first part of our series, Mountain State Meth, we'll meet a woman who's lived that nightmare. She came home one day to find police officers swarming her apartment building. They were busting a meth lab right across the hall from where she lived and taking everything she owned because it was contaminated by the toxic fumes from the chemicals used to make the drug. Also at 11, exclusive new details on the recent rise in cases like this one and a new solution in the works for the innocent victims of meth. You'll see those stories tonight only on 13 News at 11. Well, meth is also the subject of today's 13 News web poll. We'd like to know, what do you think is the most effective way to combat the meth problem? To take part, just go to WOWKTV.com and we'll have the results tonight on 13 News at 11. Destruction caused by drugs in our hometowns. Plus, West Virginia legislators have agreed on the dates for a special gubernatorial election. But now someone has to foot the bill. We'll have reaction from the Kanawha County Commission. And as energy prices continue to rise, one local business owner in the southern coalfields is shifting to alternative energy and creating new jobs. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Sandra Cole, live and local from your hometown. This is 13 News at 11.
This is WOWK, the home of 13 News, where weather comes first. Here's your Storm Tracker 13 first for
Several opportunities for wintry mix, some snow, Arctic air, all that and more in just a few minutes.
All right, we'll see you then. Thank you, Spencer. Tonight we begin a month-long series on the effects of drugs on our hometowns. Investigators all across our region are reporting a resurgence in meth labs. It's a world where household chemicals can be turned into the powerful, profitable, and addictive drug, methamphetamine. Here's what you need to know. Police tell us they fought back hard after meth became a West Virginia epidemic around 2003. And for a while, meth makers became very scarce. But now they're back, and they brought with them another epidemic, a terrible plague on innocent people who become casualties of the war on drugs. And that's where we begin tonight, with a very strange case involving a meth lab, a drug raid, and a woman who lost everything. Not because she was involved in the crime, but simply because she lived too close to an apartment where a meth lab turned it into a toxic waste dump.
It could be any place. I mean, these things are popping up everywhere.
Lisa Bragg should know. A meth lab popped up in her apartment building.
To me, the traffic that rivaled McDonald's outside my door 24/7, you know, it didn't surprise me that they found something there.
But Lisa was threatened by more than just the danger she could see. She faced an unseen danger too. The powerful toxic chemicals used in making meth seep into everything, right through the walls and floors. So when police raided the place and sent in crews to clean out the lab, they cleaned out Lisa as well.
When you come home and you see a sign that says condemned, contaminated, you're like, what does this mean? You know, what does this mean?
It means most of the stuff you own is now trash.
As far as furniture goes, you can not recover that. You can't get your beds, you can't get your clothes, nothing like that. So appliances, you cannot recover those things. My grandmother's recipes, my grandmother's jewelry, my graduate thesis that I worked on for years, my children's pictures growing up. You can't explain it. I mean, it's like you've been wiped out like a fire or a flood.
Except in a fire or a flood, you can call the American Red Cross.
I called the Red Cross and was really surprised to find out that they could not help us because they don't help victims of meth contamination like this.
Red Cross spokeswoman Tara Hines says that's true. Just for things like evacuations or condemned buildings, she told us, that's out of our range of activities. What's more, Lisa says the decontamination company, Simons Environmental, wanted $1,800 to return what could be salvaged.
The people that helped us out were the Union Mission. They offered us some furniture.
I don't know her name. I don't know her personally, but it's not. Unfortunately, it's not uncommon. We see a lot of people with circumstances and meth labs and drug situations. Obviously, is an epidemic in our community. So we see this sorts of things quite often, and again, we're just happy to be able to help.
The City of St. Albans did nothing to help us with anything. Police didn't have any answers. They knew nothing.
And that may be one of the most frustrating aspects of this story for Lisa. Her apartment, with the meth lab right across the hall, was about 100 yards, just a football field away from the St. Albans Police Department.
You just can't let people have everything be wiped out and leave people homeless and out in the street like that. It's just not humane, and it's not something that we should be doing here in this country. They need to address this issue right now.
Now, we spoke with the St. Albans mayor, who says he is sure that officers would have offered Lisa any help they could. A reminder that our Devastated by Drug series will continue throughout the month of February with a different story every Thursday at 11. Well, the good news is there are now ways for people to get help when they're displaced after living too close to a meth lab. Our 13 News' Dan Maddox joins us live in the Huntington newsroom with more on that. What did you find out, Dan?
Sandra, people displaced from their homes after living near a condemned meth lab can now get help from the government. According to a spokesperson, property owners can now file with the West Virginia Court of Claims if a nearby meth lab forces them from their home. Cheryl Hall says people affected can seek to be compensated by the court up to $2,000.
It may not seem like a lot of money, but $2,000 can cover a couple of months' rent or more. And usually they're displaced for that amount of time. Usually the property owner seeks help and rehabs the property.
Hall says you can only claim the money to relocate. It does not cover items like furniture or clothing. Hall says the money comes from federal grants and from crime victims funds. You can call for claim forms. That number is 1-877-562-6878. So, Sandra, it's a way for those displaced by this crime to get some help.
Very good news for those people. Thank you very much, Dan. And that brings us to today's 13 News web poll. We asked, what do you think is the most effective way to combat the meth problem? 71% say increased penalties for those who make and distribute meth. 20% answer laws and regulations for the ingredients used to make it. 5% say more emphasis on education, and 3% say more funding to fight meth. To take part in our daily web polls and for your hometown news, weather, and sports, you can log on anytime at WOWKTV.com. In other news tonight, energy costs continue to go.
County police pulled over 27-year-old Anthony Eckenrode on Sissonville Drive for an improper registration violation. During a search of the vehicle, they found numerous items and equipment to make methamphetamine. They also found a .38 caliber pistol underneath the front seat. Eckenrode is charged with attempt to operate a clandestine lab. Deputies in Raleigh County are looking for the man who robbed the Little General store in Daniel.